The doors of the tower slammed shut before Alara could turn around, and the sound echoed through her chest like a second heartbeat that did not belong to her. She pressed her palm against the cold stone, feeling the grooves of old carvings under her skin, carvings she had never noticed on any wall in the Pack territory before. Somewhere behind that door, on the other side of a distance that suddenly felt impossible to cross, she could hear her husband's footsteps walking away, not running, not hesitating, walking away, calm and steady, as if he had just finished an errand and not condemned his own wife to isolation. 3 days earlier, Ilara Voss had woken up as the Luna of the Blackthorn Pack, a woman who had learned to smile through rooms full of people who did not want her there. She had known, from the very first night of her marriage to Alpha Kale Blackthorn, that his heart had already been given away to someone else. She had told herself it did not matter. Packs were built on duty first, and feeling second, her mother used to say, and duty was something Alara understood well. What she had not expected was betrayal, dressed up as protection. It had started with small things, a missing herb pouch blamed on her carelessness, a servant who suddenly refused to look her in the eye, whispers that stopped the moment she entered a room and started again the moment she left. Ilara noticed all of it, the way she noticed everything, quietly and without complaint, filing each slight away, like a splinter she would deal with later. She should have dealt with them sooner. The rumors reached a boiling point on a night when an Omega named Grace was found lifeless near the training grounds, her body marked in a way no one could explain. Within hours, whispers turned into accusations, and the accusations pointed directly at Alara. She had been seen near that part of the grounds earlier that evening. She had argued, quietly, with Grace about a duty roster 2 days before. To anyone looking for a reason to condemn her, the story wrote itself. Ilara had stood in front of the Elder Council with her spine straight and her voice steady, insisting she had nothing to do with the Omega's death. She spoke the truth as clearly as she knew how. She had walked those grounds because she always walked them at dusk, a habit from childhood. Nothing more sinister than that. But truth, she was learning, mattered less than the story people wanted to believe, especially when someone powerful was pushing that story forward. Celine Marrow had not needed to say a single accusing word herself. She simply let others speak for her, nodding along at the right moments, letting doubt spread like smoke through a closed room. Ilara had watched her do it and understood, with a clarity that made her stomach turn, that this had never been about Grace at all. This was about clearing a path. Kale had not defended her. That was the part that still stung sharper than anything else. Sharper even than being dragged toward this tower in front of Pack members, who had once bowed to her. He had looked at her with something that might have been regret, might have been guilt, but he had said nothing to stop the elders from ruling that she be confined. For her own safety, they called it, for the safety of the Pack. As if isolating her in the one place every child in Blackthorn territory had been warned never to approach, was somehow an act of mercy. The Moon Tower had stood at the edge of Packland for longer than anyone could remember, a crumbling structure of gray stone wrapped in old vines and older stories. Parents told their children it was haunted by wolves who had lost their minds to the moon's pull, wolves so dangerous the Pack elders of some forgotten generation had built a prison strong enough to hold them. No one used it anymore. No one was supposed to need it. Until now. Alara turned from the door and let her eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through cracks near the ceiling. The tower's interior was nothing like she expected. Instead of a bare, hollow room built only for punishment, she found walls covered in faded markings, spirals, and crescent shapes carved so deeply into the stone that centuries of dust had not erased them. A narrow staircase wound upward into shadow, and somewhere far above, she could hear the wind moving through gaps in the old roof. She sat down slowly on the cold floor, wrapping her arms around her knees, and allowed herself, for the first time since the accusation began, to feel the full weight of what had happened. Not anger yet, not even sadness, not really. Just a strange, hollow disbelief that the man she had married, whatever their marriage had or had not been, could stand by while she was locked away like something dangerous. She thought of Celine's face in the crowd as the guards led her away. There had been no triumph in her expression exactly, nothing so obvious as a smirk, just a quiet stillness, the look of someone watching a plan unfold exactly as intended. Ilara had seen enough calculated expressions during her time as Luna to recognize when someone was pleased, and hiding it well. Outside, she knew, the pack would be settling into their evening routines, pretending nothing unusual had happened, the way packs always pretended when uncomfortable truths threatened their peace. Kale would return to his study, or perhaps to Celine's chambers, and the machinery of Blackthorn territory would continue turning without her. A soft sound broke her thoughts. It came from above, faint and rhythmic, almost like breathing. Ilara lifted her head and stared into the darkness at the top of the staircase, her heart picking up speed despite her attempt to stay calm. Whatever legends the pack told about this place, she had assumed they were exaggerations meant to frighten children. Now, alone in the dark with an unexplainable sound drifting down toward her, she was not so certain. She rose to her feet, brushing dust from her dress, and made her way toward the staircase. Something about the markings on the walls pulled her forward, an odd, magnetic curiosity stronger than her fear. As she climbed, moonlight began spilling through gaps in the tower's upper walls, painting silver strips across the worn steps. At the top, she found a circular chamber, open to the sky through a partially collapsed roof. Moonlight poured down in a wide column, illuminating more carvings, these ones arranged in a careful pattern around the edges of the floor. In the center of the chamber sat a single, weathered stone pedestal, its surface smooth from age, empty of anything except a thin layer of dust. Ilara stepped into the moonlight without thinking, drawn by an instinct she could not name. The moment the light touched her skin, something inside her shifted, subtle but unmistakable, like a key turning in a lock she had not known existed. Her wolf, usually calm and quiet within her, suddenly stirred with an intensity she had never felt before, restless and alert, as though sensing something important was about to happen. She staggered back a step, pressing a hand to her chest, breathing hard. For a moment, the carvings around her seemed to glow faintly, a silver light tracing along the grooves before fading just as quickly. She blinked, unsure if she had imagined it, unsure if exhaustion and grief were playing tricks on her mind. But her wolf did not settle. If anything, it grew more restless, pressing against the inside of her skin like it wanted out, like it recognized this place, even though Ilara herself had never set foot here before tonight. She sank down onto the edge of the stone pedestal, trying to steady her breathing, trying to make sense of feelings she had no context for. Her mind drifted back, unbidden, to a story her grandmother used to tell when Ilara was small, back before her grandmother passed, and the tale was mostly forgotten. A story about judges who once walked among the packs, women and men who were not alphas or betas or omegas, but something separate entirely, something older. Judges who answered only to the moon itself, who could see through lies no matter how carefully constructed, who held power over rank and pack ties that no ordinary wolf could challenge. Ilara had always assumed it was just that, a story, the kind of thing grandmothers told to make children behave. She had certainly never imagined it might have anything to do with her. She stayed in that circular chamber long after the strange stirring in her chest quieted to something more manageable. The moonlight eventually shifted, moving across the floor as the night wore on, and Ilara found herself watching it with a fascination that almost made her forget where she was, and why. Almost. Because no matter how strange and quietly wondrous this tower turned out to be, the truth remained unchanged. She had been locked away by her own husband, condemned on the word of a woman who wanted her gone, and left to face whatever came next entirely alone. Whatever this place was, whatever it meant, it did not undo the wound of being abandoned by the one person who should have stood beside her. She thought of Kale's face again, that flicker of guilt he had not acted on. Guilt without action was worth nothing at all. She had learned that lesson clearly enough tonight. As dawn approached, gray light beginning to replace the silver moonlight through the broken roof, Ilara made her way back down the winding staircase to the lower chamber. She needed rest, though she doubted sleep would come easily. She needed to think clearly about what had happened, and what she would do now that her old life, whatever peace it had offered, was closed off to her. She curled up in a corner where the stone floor was slightly warmer, pulling her knees to her chest again, and closed her eyes. Sleep did eventually claim her, heavy and dreamless, the exhaustion of the day finally outweighing the storm of thoughts in her mind. She did not know, as she drifted off, that the carvings on the walls around her had begun, faintly and slowly, to glow. Elsewhere in Blackthorn territory, in a room lit by warm candlelight, Celine Marrow allowed herself a small, satisfied breath as she looked out over the sleeping grounds. The plan had worked exactly as she hoped. Alara was gone, tucked safely away where she could cause no more trouble, and Cale, grieving and guilty as he was, remained close enough for Celine to comfort, to guide, to slowly reshape into the man she had always believed he was meant to be. She had waited years for this moment, years of watching Cale marry a woman chosen by the elders, instead of the one he had once promised his heart to. Years of smiling politely at pack gatherings, while envy curled tight and bitter in her chest. Now, finally, the path ahead looked clear. She did not know, could not have known, what stirred quietly within the walls of the moon tower that night, or what it would mean for every careful plan she had built. Morning came slowly to Blackthorn territory, gray light creeping over the hills and settling into the packhouse windows. Cale Blackthorn had not slept. He sat at the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing in particular, replaying the previous day's events over and over, until they blurred together into a single unbearable loop. He told himself he had done what was necessary. The elders had demanded action, the pack was unsettled, and Celine had been so certain, so convincing, that isolating Alara was the only way to keep the peace, until the truth about Grace's death could be uncovered. He told himself the moon tower was simply a temporary measure, nothing permanent, nothing cruel. But the image of Alara's face as the guards led her away kept returning to him, unbidden and unwelcome. She had not screamed or fought. She had simply looked at him, once, with an expression he could not quite name, somewhere between disbelief and quiet acceptance, as though she had expected this kind of failure from him all along. That look bothered him more than any accusation the elders could have thrown his way. He rose finally, dressing in silence, and made his way down to the main hall where pack business would already be waiting for him, as it always did, regardless of what personal turmoil churned beneath the surface. An alpha did not have the luxury of standing still, even when standing still was exactly what his heart wanted. Celine found him there within the hour, gliding into the hall with the practiced grace of someone who had spent years perfecting her presence around him. She offered comforting words about how difficult the decision must have been, how proud she was of him for putting the pack's safety first. Cale accepted the comfort the way a drowning man accepts a floating branch, without examining too closely whether it would actually hold his weight. Neither of them spoke of the Omega girl found near the training grounds with anything close to the attention her death deserved. Neither of them noticed, in the rush of managing an unsettled pack, that the true circumstances of Grace's passing remained entirely unexamined, buried beneath the more convenient story that had already taken hold. Far from the main hall, in the crumbling tower at the edge of Packland, Alara slept on, unaware that the carvings along the walls continued to hold a faint, patient glow, waiting, as they had waited for generations, for someone who finally belonged. Voices carried up through the cracks in the tower wall, low and hurried, pulling Alara out of sleep before the sun had fully cleared the hills. She sat up quickly, disoriented for a moment, forgetting where she was, until the cold stone beneath her palms reminded her all too clearly. She crept toward the narrow window slit near the base of the tower and pressed her eye to the gap. 2 guards stood outside, their postures stiff, their voices pitched just low enough that she had to strain to catch the words. "She's not to be fed until the elders confirm the ruling stands," one guard said, arms crossed over his chest. "Direct orders." "From the Alpha?" the second asked, sounding uncertain. "From Celine," the first replied, and something in his tone suggested he did not fully agree with the order, but had no intention of questioning it either. Alara pulled back from the window, her jaw tightening. So this was how it would be, not an official punishment handed down by pack law, but a quiet campaign of neglect, dressed up as procedure, orchestrated by a woman who had no formal authority to give orders at all, yet somehow commanded obedience anyway. She sat back against the wall and forced herself to breathe evenly. Panic would not help her here. She needed to think, to plan, to figure out how she was going to survive whatever came next. Because relying on rescue from a husband who had not defended her once already seemed like a foolish hope to hold on to. Hours passed. The tower remained silent, except for the occasional shuffle of guard boots outside and the wind moving through the broken places in the old stone. Ilara explored what she could of the lower chamber in the daylight, running her fingers along the strange carvings, trying to make sense of patterns that seemed to repeat in cycles, moons waxing and waning across the walls in an endless procession. She found, tucked into a gap behind a loose stone near the base of the staircase, a small bundle wrapped in cloth so old it nearly disintegrated at her touch. Inside, she discovered a handful of dried herbs, unfamiliar to her, and a thin strip of leather, etched with symbols matching those on the walls. She held the leather strip carefully, turning it over in her hands, wondering who had left it here and how long ago. By the time evening arrived, hunger had settled deep and uncomfortable in her stomach, and the guards outside showed no sign of bringing food. Ilara told herself she had endured worse discomforts during difficult training seasons as a young wolf. She could endure this too, at least for now. It was near midnight when she heard footsteps again, different this time, softer, more hesitant than the confident stride of guards on duty. She moved toward the door, listening carefully, and heard a faint scratching sound followed by a small object sliding beneath the gap at the bottom. She knelt and found a folded piece of cloth containing a modest portion of bread and dried meat. No note accompanied it, no explanation. Ilara looked toward the door, half expecting to see eyes peering back at her through some gap, but found nothing except silence. Someone, it seemed, disagreed with the order to starve her, and was quietly willing to risk punishment to make sure she did not go without entirely. She ate slowly, grateful and wary in equal measure, wondering who among the pack still held enough conscience to defy Celine's quiet cruelty. She did not have to wonder long. 2 nights later, as she sat in the upper chamber watching moonlight spill across the old stone pedestal, she heard the same soft footsteps approaching, followed by a familiar voice, hushed but unmistakable, drifting up from below. "Ilara? Are you there?" She recognized the voice immediately. Edwin, the pack's aging historian, a gentle man who had spent most of his life buried in old records and forgotten stories, someone she had spoken with on occasion, during quiet afternoons, when Luna duties allowed her a moment of peace. She hurried down the winding staircase and knelt near the door. "Edwin," she said softly, careful to keep her voice low enough that any patrolling guard would not overhear. "How did you get past them?" "I told them I needed to check on old texts stored near the tower," Edwin replied, his voice carrying the slight tremor of age, but none of the uncertainty she expected. It was not entirely a lie. There are texts here, Ilara, older than anything else in this territory. "You brought the food," she said, understanding settling into place. "I could not, in good conscience, let you go hungry over lies," Edwin said. "Whatever happened to that poor girl Grace, I do not believe for a moment that you had anything to do with it." Relief washed through Ilara so suddenly that she had to press a hand against the door to steady herself. It was the first kindness anyone had shown her since this nightmare began, the first voice that had spoken in her defense instead of standing silently by. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning it more deeply than the simple words could convey. "There is something else," Edwin continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Something I need to ask you, and I need you to answer honestly, no matter how strange the question sounds." Ilara pressed closer to the door. "Ask. Have you noticed anything unusual since you were brought here? Changes in your wolf? Strange markings responding to you? Anything at all that felt different from anything you have experienced before?" Her breath caught. She thought of the moonlight pouring through the broken roof, the way her wolf had stirred with an intensity she had never known, the faint glow she thought she had imagined tracing along the carved walls. She had told no one, had barely allowed herself to fully process it, yet here was Edwin, asking the exact right questions, as though he already suspected the answer. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "Something happened. I do not fully understand it, but yes, something changed." A long pause followed, heavy with meaning she could not yet grasp. When Edwin spoke again, his voice carried a weight she had never heard from him before. None of his usual gentle, distracted tone, but something closer to reverence. "I need to bring you something," he said. "An old text, one I found buried in the deepest part of the pack archives many years ago, one I never fully understood until tonight. Stay strong, Alara. I do not think you are meant to be here as a prisoner. I think you might be here because this tower has been waiting for you." Before she could ask what he meant, footsteps sounded in the distance, and Edwin's voice dropped away entirely. She heard him move quickly from the door, his pace hurried but careful, disappearing back into the darkness before the approaching guard could catch him near the tower. Alara remained by the door for a long while after, turning his words over in her mind, waiting for her. The idea felt impossible, absurd even, yet something in her chest, some quiet certainty she could not explain, told her Edwin was not simply speaking in riddles to comfort a frightened woman. He believed what he said. She thought again of her grandmother's old stories, judges who walked among the packs long before alphas ruled alone, women and men bound to the moon itself rather than to any single pack's hierarchy. She had dismissed those stories as fantasy her entire life. Now, locked in a forgotten tower that responded to her presence in ways she could not explain, she found herself far less certain. 2 more nights passed before Edwin returned, this time carrying a small, worn book wrapped carefully in cloth to protect it from the elements. He passed it through the gap beneath the door, along with another modest meal, his voice hushed and urgent. "I cannot stay long tonight," he said. "The guards have grown more watchful. Read what you can, by whatever light reaches you. I believe the answers you need are within those pages, though the text is old and difficult, written in a style few remember how to read fully." Alara took the book carefully, feeling its worn leather cover beneath her fingers, a strange anticipation building in her chest. "Thank you, Edwin, truly." "Do not thank me yet," he said, something solemn in his tone. "If what I suspect is true, you are about to learn something that will change far more than just your circumstances here. Be ready. Alara, whatever you find in those pages, be ready to believe it, even if every instinct tells you it cannot possibly be real." He left before she could ask more, his footsteps fading into the night. Alara carried the book up the winding staircase to the chamber, where moonlight still poured faithfully through the broken roof, and settled herself against the stone pedestal, opening the fragile pages with careful hands. The writing inside was old, the language formal and strange, filled with symbols that matched the carvings around her almost perfectly. She traced her fingers over the first page, squinting in the dim silver light, piecing together words one at a time. Long before the first packs claimed their territories, the text began. Before alphas rose to lead, and betas rose to serve, there walked among the wolves a separate order entirely, bound not to bloodlines or land, but to the moon's own judgment. These were the ones called the Moon Judges, chosen not by birth alone, but by a mark passed down through certain bloodlines so old that most packs, in time, forgot they had ever existed at all. Alara's breath caught in her throat. She continued reading, the moonlight above her seeming, impossibly, to grow slightly brighter as she moved deeper into the text, as though the tower itself approved of what she was learning. The Moon Judges held power beyond any single alpha's reach, the text continued. They could see through deception no ordinary wolf could detect, could sense corruption hidden beneath the calmest surface, and when judgment was required, they held the ability to strip rank, sever pack ties, and even silence a wolf's shift entirely, returning power to those who had been wronged, and removing it from those who had abused their position. She read on, page after page, learning of towers built specifically to awaken dormant judges, structures constructed with old magic, meant to respond only to true bloodline carriers, places that appeared, to anyone without the mark, as nothing more than crumbling ruins. Alara looked up from the pages, her heart pounding, and studied the carvings around her with new eyes. Spirals representing cycles of judgment, crescents marking phases of awakening. A pattern she had dismissed as simple decoration revealed itself now as something closer to a map, a guide meant for exactly the kind of awakening she had already begun to experience. She closed the book slowly, her mind spinning with implications she barely knew how to process. If this was true, if she truly carried whatever bloodline the text described, then everything about her situation shifted entirely. She was not simply a discarded Luna, locked away by a husband too weak to stand against his mistress. She was something far older, something the tower itself had recognized the moment she stepped into its light. The thought should have brought comfort. Instead, it brought a fresh wave of uncertainty, because power, like the text described, came with responsibility, and Alara had no idea how to wield something she barely understood, let alone how to survive long enough to learn. Outside the tower, life in Blackthorn territory continued its uneasy rhythm. Celine grew bolder each day, taking on responsibilities that once belonged solely to Alara, greeting visiting pack representatives, overseeing household decisions, positioning herself so naturally into the role of Luna that few pack members thought to question the transition. Kale watched it happen with a strange, hollow feeling he could not name, telling himself it was simply practical, simply necessary given the circumstances, even as some quiet part of him recognized the wrongness of how easily Celine had slipped into a place that was never meant to be hers. He visited the tower only once during those early days, standing at a careful distance from the door, unable to bring himself to knock, to speak, to face whatever expression Alara might give him now. He told himself he was giving her space to process what happened. In truth, he was avoiding the discomfort of his own guilt, a coward's excuse dressed up as consideration. He left without a word, and Alara, listening from within, recognized his footsteps, and chose not to call out either. There was nothing left to say to a man who had already made his choice clear through silence and inaction. Whatever came next, she understood now, she would have to face it on her own, or with whatever quiet allies like Edwin were brave enough to offer. As the moon rose high above the broken roof that night, Alara opened the old book once more, determined to learn everything the fragile pages could teach her before her strength, and her patience, ran out entirely. A scream cut through the pack house before dawn, sharp and sudden enough to jolt half the household from sleep. Alara heard nothing of it from within the tower, too far removed from the main grounds for sound to carry, but the news reached her the following night through Edwin, his voice grave as he crouched near the door with her small meal. "Another death," he said without preamble. "A young beta named Owen, found near the eastern fence line, much the same as Grace was found." Alara's stomach tightened. "The same circumstances?" "Close enough that the pack is beginning to whisper," Edwin confirmed. "And this time, you could not possibly be blamed. You have been locked in this tower for over a week. Even the most convinced among the elders cannot pretend otherwise." A small, bitter relief flickered through her, quickly followed by a heavier concern. If she was not responsible, then someone else was. Someone still walking free among the pack. Someone whose actions had already cost one innocent life, and now a second. Do the elders suspect anyone? "Not yet, though speculation is spreading quickly," Edwin said. "Some believe it may be a rogue wolf crossing into our territory. Others whisper of something darker within our own ranks. I do not know which is true. What I do know is that your imprisonment no longer makes any logical sense, and yet no order has come to release you." Alara absorbed this in silence, anger simmering beneath her composed exterior. 2 deaths now, and still she remained locked away, forgotten by the very pack she had once served faithfully. It confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. Her confinement was never truly about protecting the pack, or investigating Grace's death. It had always been about removing her, conveniently and completely, from a position that stood in someone else's way. "Celine," she said quietly, more to herself than to Edwin. "I cannot prove her involvement in either death," Edwin replied carefully. "But I do not believe it is coincidence that both victims were pack members, who, in recent months, expressed doubts about her growing influence over Kale. Grace herself had spoken to me once about strange instructions Celine had given her, tasks that seemed designed to isolate you from pack gatherings. I did not think much of it at the time. Now I wonder if her questioning cost her more than she realized." The pieces settled into place with sickening clarity. Grace had not died because of any conflict with Alara. She had died because she knew too much, saw too clearly, and posed a quiet threat to whatever plan Celine had been constructing. And now Owen, apparently, had met the same fate for similar reasons. "We need proof," Alara said, her voice steady despite the anger building within her. "Real proof, not speculation. Something the elders cannot dismiss the way they dismiss the truth about me." "I am searching," Edwin assured her, carefully, so as not to draw suspicion myself. It will take time. Time we may not have, Elara murmured, though she understood there was little else to be done. She could not investigate from within a locked tower. She could only wait, learn what she could from the old text Edwin had brought her, and trust that patience would eventually deliver the opportunity she needed. Over the following days, Elara devoted herself fully to the fragile book's pages, reading and rereading passages until the old, formal language began to feel less foreign. She learned that the mark of a moon judge typically remained dormant for generations, passed silently through bloodlines that had long forgotten their own significance. Activated only under specific conditions, moonlight combined with a structure built to recognize the bloodline, exactly the circumstances she now found herself within. She learned, too, that early awakening carried risks. A judge who came into her power too suddenly, without proper guidance, could struggle to control the intensity of it, could find her wolf overwhelmed by abilities it had never been trained to hold. The text spoke of judges from centuries past, who had lost themselves entirely to premature awakenings, consumed by power they could not yet master. The warning unsettled her, but she pressed forward regardless, understanding that whatever risks accompanied this awakening, remaining ignorant carried risks of its own. She began practicing small exercises the text described, simple meditations meant to help a new judge sense the presence of deception nearby, to feel the subtle wrongness that marked a lie even when spoken with perfect composure. It was during one such exercise, late on a night when clouds mostly obscured the moon, that Elara felt something shift within the tower itself. A presence, faint but unmistakable, moving somewhere near the base of the structure. She rose quickly, moving to the narrow window slit, and peered out into the darkness. A figure stood near the tower's outer wall, cloaked and cautious, clearly attempting to remain unseen. Alara's pulse quickened. It was not Edwin. The build was wrong, the movements different, more hesitant, more nervous. She watched as the figure crept closer, glancing repeatedly over their shoulder, as though fearing discovery. "Who's there?" Elara called softly through the gap, deciding boldness served her better than silent uncertainty. The figure froze, then slowly approached the door, pulling back a hood to reveal the face of a young woman Elara recognized vaguely from the pack's household staff, though she could not immediately recall her name. "My name is Nora," the young woman whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I worked alongside Grace before she died. I need to tell someone what I saw, and I do not know who else to trust." Elara's heart quickened further. "I'm listening." "The night Grace died," Nora continued, glancing nervously over her shoulder again, "I saw her arguing with someone near the eastern fence, the same place where Owen was later found. I could not hear the words clearly, but I recognized the voice. It was Celine." Elara pressed closer to the gap in the door, careful to keep her own voice steady despite the surge of vindication rushing through her. "Would you testify to that before the elders?" Nora hesitated, fear flickering across her expression. "I am frightened, Luna Elara. If Celine truly is responsible, and I speak against her, what happens to me?" "I understand your fear," Elara said gently, softening her tone despite the urgency thrumming beneath her words. "But silence has already cost 2 lives. If you say nothing, how many more might follow?" Nora's eyes filled with tears, though she nodded slowly, some resolve settling into her expression despite the fear still evident in her posture. "I will think on it. I promise you that much. I could not simply walk away without telling someone what I saw." She left before Elara could press further, disappearing back into the shadows with the same nervous caution she had arrived with. Elara remained at the window long after Nora's footsteps faded, turning the conversation over in her mind, weighing what it might mean. A witness, a real, tangible connection between Celine and the location where both deaths occurred. It was not definitive proof, not yet, but it was more than speculation, more than the vague suspicions she and Edwin had been working with previously. If Nora could be convinced to speak formally, if her testimony could be paired with whatever evidence Edwin managed to uncover, perhaps the truth might finally break through the careful narrative Celine had constructed. Elara returned to the upper chamber that night, with renewed determination, settling into the moonlight and allowing herself, for the first time since her confinement began, to feel something closer to hope. The tower's carvings glowed faintly around her as she meditated, and she found herself, gradually, growing more attuned to the strange sensations Edwin's book described, a heightened awareness settling over her senses, like a second skin slowly being woven into place. She did not yet know the full extent of what she was becoming. She did not yet know how to fully summon or control whatever power slumbered within her bloodline, but she understood, with growing certainty, that she was no longer simply Alara Voss, the discarded Luna locked away by a weak husband and a scheming mistress. Something older, something patient, was awakening within her, and she intended to be ready when it fully arrived. Days passed in careful rhythm. Edwin continued his quiet visits, bringing food and small updates about pack tensions, steadily rising as the second unexplained death fueled fear and speculation among the wolves. He had not yet found concrete evidence linking Celine directly to either killing, though he continued searching old records and quietly questioning trusted friends who might have noticed something useful. Nora did not return immediately, and Alara worried, in quiet moments, that fear had ultimately silenced her entirely. But nearly a week after their first conversation, Nora appeared again at the tower's base, her expression more resolute than before. "I spoke with another servant," she whispered through the door. "Someone who saw Celine near the training grounds, around the time Owen was killed as well. She is frightened too, but she is willing to speak if I speak first." Ilara's chest tightened with cautious excitement. 2 witnesses would be far harder for the elders to dismiss than 1. "There is something else," Nora added, her voice dropping even lower. "I overheard Celine speaking with one of her closest attendants 2 nights ago. She mentioned something about needing to move quickly before, in her words, the tower gives up its secrets. I do not know exactly what she meant, but she sounded worried, almost frightened." A chill moved through Alara despite the relatively warm night air. If Celine had somehow learned about the strange awakening occurring within the tower, if she suspected even a fraction of what Alara was becoming, it would explain the growing urgency in her actions, the mounting desperation to solidify her position as Luna before anything could interfere with her plans. "Thank you, Nora," Alara said quietly. "Please, be careful. If Celine suspects you know anything, your safety could be at risk." "I will be careful," Nora promised. "But I cannot simply do nothing anymore. Not after what happened to Grace and Owen. Too many people have already stayed silent for too long." She disappeared into the darkness once more, leaving Alara alone with racing thoughts and a growing sense that events were accelerating beyond anyone's careful control. Whatever Celine was planning, whatever urgency now drove her actions, Alara understood that time was running short, for all of them. She climbed the winding staircase to the upper chamber and settled into the familiar column of moonlight, closing her eyes and reaching, with growing confidence, toward the strange awareness stirring within her. The carvings around her pulsed faintly in response, and somewhere deep within her chest, her wolf stirred with an intensity that no longer frightened her, but instead felt, increasingly, like recognition. Whatever she was becoming, she would not remain a passive prisoner much longer. The tower had chosen her for a reason, and soon, she suspected, that reason would make itself fully known. Thunder rolled across the hills the night everything nearly fell apart, dark clouds swallowing the moon entirely, and leaving the tower shrouded in a blackness Alara had not experienced since her confinement began. Without moonlight, the carvings on the walls remained dull and lifeless, and for the first time in weeks, she felt entirely, uncomfortably human again, stripped of whatever strange awareness had begun steadying her nerves. It was on this darkest of nights that the door to the tower finally opened, not through Edwin's careful smuggling, but through a full, deliberate unlocking, torches flaring outside as several guards entered, expressions unreadable in the flickering light. Alara rose immediately, every instinct sharpening despite the storm's interference with her newfound senses. "What is happening?" "Orders from the Elder Council," one guard said stiffly. "You are to be brought before them immediately." Her pulse quickened, uncertain whether this summons meant rescue or further condemnation. She said nothing further, simply allowing herself to be escorted from the tower she had called prison for weeks, blinking against torchlight after so long spent adjusting to dim, filtered moonbeams. The walk to the main hall felt longer than she remembered, pack members watching from windows and doorways as she passed, expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility, planted there, she suspected, by weeks of careful rumor spreading in her absence. She held her chin level regardless, refusing to let uncertainty show on her face, even as her thoughts raced through every possible reason for this sudden summons. The Elder Council sat assembled when she entered, 5 aging wolves seated in a semicircle before the raised platform where Kale himself stood, his expression carefully neutral in a way that told her nothing useful. Celine stood near him, close enough that the positioning alone spoke volumes, her expression composed, but her eyes sharp, watchful, calculating. Ilara Voss, the eldest council member intoned, "You have been summoned to answer additional questions regarding the deaths of Grace and Owen, given new information that has come to the council's attention." Ilara's chest tightened. New information could mean many things, could work for her or against her, depending entirely on its source and nature. She kept her expression composed, waiting. "A witness has come forward," the elder continued, "claiming to have overheard you threatening Grace shortly before her death." The accusation landed like a blow, unexpected and disorienting. "That is false," Ilara said firmly. "I have been locked in the Moon Tower for weeks. Any threats supposedly made before Grace's death would predate my confinement, and I assure you, no such conversation ever took place." "The witness insists otherwise," the elder replied, gesturing toward a figure stepping forward from near the room's edge. Ilara's stomach dropped as she recognized the face. A young beta named Callum, someone she barely knew beyond passing pleasantries during pack gatherings, someone who had no obvious reason to lie about her, unless someone else had given him one. "Tell the council what you witnessed," the elder instructed. Callum's eyes darted briefly toward Celine, before settling on some point just past Ilara's shoulder, avoiding direct eye contact entirely. "I heard Luna Ilara tell Grace that she would regret speaking out of turn," he said, his voice carrying a rehearsed quality that made Ilara's suspicions sharpen immediately. This was perhaps 2 days before Grace was found. "That never happened," Ilara said, keeping her voice level despite the anger building beneath her composure. "I ask the council to consider why this witness has only now come forward, weeks after Grace's death, and well into my confinement." The eldest council member studied her carefully. "A fair question. Callum, why did you wait so long to share this information?" Callum hesitated, another quick glance toward Celine before he answered. "I was afraid, given Luna Ilara's position. I did not wish to cause trouble." Ilara felt something shift within her chest, a subtle, unfamiliar sharpening of awareness despite the storm still raging outside, despite the absence of direct moonlight to fuel whatever power slumbered within her. She focused on Callum's words, on the slight unsteadiness in his voice, the way his shoulders held tension that did not match someone simply nervous about addressing a council. He was lying. She could feel it now, a certainty settling into her bones with a clarity she had never experienced before, not through any obvious sign a normal wolf might notice, but through something deeper, more instinctual, as though her very awareness of truth and deception had sharpened beyond ordinary limits. "He is lying," Ilara said, the words leaving her before she had fully decided to speak them. A murmur rippled through the assembled council. The eldest member frowned. "That is a serious accusation, Luna Ilara, and you offer no evidence beyond your own denial." Ilara hesitated only a moment before pressing forward, trusting the strange certainty guiding her. "Ask him what color dress Grace wore that evening. If his memory of this conversation is genuine, he should recall such details clearly." Callum's eyes widened slightly, panic flickering across his features before he could suppress it. I do not recall the specifics of her clothing. Why would that matter?" "Because a genuine memory carries detail," Ilara said steadily. "A fabricated story, rehearsed and repeated, often lacks the small, unimportant particulars that real experience naturally includes. Ask him anything about that supposed conversation beyond the rehearsed accusation itself, and I suspect his answers will prove equally vague." The eldest council member studied Callum with renewed scrutiny. "Where exactly did this conversation take place?" Near the eastern training grounds," Callum stammered, his composure crumbling further with each passing second. "Grace's duties that week involved kitchen work, not training grounds," Another council member interjected, consulting a small ledger. Why would she have been near the training grounds at all? Callum's silence stretched long and damning. Alara watched Celine's expression from the corner of her eye, noting the slight tightening around her jaw, the first crack in her otherwise perfect composure since Alara had entered the room. I believe, Alara said carefully, that someone instructed this witness to offer false testimony against me, perhaps to ensure my continued confinement, despite growing evidence that I bear no responsibility for either death. That is a serious accusation to level without proof, the eldest elder warned. Then let me offer proof, Alara said, her voice gaining strength as the strange certainty within her continued to sharpen. I have witnesses of my own. Pack members willing to testify that Celine Marrow was seen near the locations of both deaths shortly before each occurred. Celine's composure finally cracked visibly, a flash of something sharp and dangerous crossing her expression before she smoothed it back into careful neutrality. This is absurd, she said, her voice tight. Luna Ilara is clearly desperate, grasping at anything to escape rightful consequences. Then you will have no objection to these witnesses being heard, Ilara replied evenly, holding Celine's gaze without flinching. A tense silence settled over the hall. The eldest council member exchanged glances with his fellow elders before speaking again. Very well. If witnesses exist who can speak to this matter, the council will hear them. Are they present tonight? Ilara hesitated, aware that Nora had not been informed of this sudden summons, aware that pulling her into a formal council hearing without preparation carried real risk. But the moment demanded action regardless of preparation. I request they be brought forward, under the council's protection, given the risks they may face for speaking honestly. The eldest elder nodded slowly. Guards, locate the witnesses' Luna Ilara names, and bring them before this council under protective escort. As guards departed to retrieve Nora and her fellow servant, the hall settled into uncomfortable silence, tension thick enough to feel physically present in the air. Kale, who had remained silent throughout the entire exchange, finally spoke, his voice carrying a roughness Ilara had not expected. Ilara, he said quietly, is this true? Do you truly believe Celine bears responsibility for these deaths? She turned to face him fully for the first time since entering the hall, studying the conflict evident in his expression, guilt and doubt warring visibly across his features. I believe the evidence, once fully heard, will speak clearly enough on its own, she said carefully. I have made no accusations without reason to believe them true. Kale held her gaze a moment longer before looking away, unable, it seemed, to offer any further response. Celine stepped closer to him, murmuring something too quiet for Ilara to catch, though the tightness in Kale's shoulders suggested whatever comfort Celine offered did little to ease his unsettled thoughts. The wait for the witnesses stretched long and uncomfortable, the storm outside continuing to rage against the hall's tall windows. Ilara used the time to steady her breathing, to reinforce the strange, sharpened awareness, still humming quietly beneath her composure, uncertain whether it would hold strong enough to help her recognize further deception, should Celine attempt any additional maneuvers, before the night concluded. When Nora finally arrived, escorted carefully by 2 guards, her expression carried visible fear, though her spine remained straight, her resolve evident, despite the obvious anxiety in her posture. She glanced briefly at Ilara before facing the council, gathering visible courage before she began to speak. I saw Celine Marrow near the eastern fence line the night Grace died, Nora said, her voice trembling initially before steadying as she continued. They were arguing, though I could not make out the specific words. I recognized both voices clearly. A second servant, brought forward moments later, offered similar testimony regarding Owen's death, describing Celine's presence near the training grounds, under circumstances that matched no legitimate reason for her to have been there. The council listened carefully, exchanging quiet glances as the testimonies accumulated, painting a picture increasingly difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. Celine attempted several times to interject, to offer alternative explanations for her presence in each location, but her responses grew increasingly strained, increasingly difficult to reconcile against the growing weight of witness accounts. By the time the hearing concluded well past midnight, the eldest council member rose slowly, his expression grave. Given the testimony heard tonight, The council finds sufficient reason to suspend Alara Voss's confinement immediately, pending further investigation into these serious allegations against Celine Marrow. Relief flooded through Alara so intensely her knees nearly buckled beneath her. She remained standing regardless, refusing to show weakness in a room still populated by uncertain allies and open enemies alike. Celine's expression, for the briefest moment, revealed something close to panic before she managed to smooth it back into composed dignity. "This is a grave mistake," she said, her voice tight with barely restrained fury. "I have done nothing wrong." "The investigation will determine that clearly enough," the eldest elder replied evenly. "Until then, Luna Elara will be restored to her rightful position within the pack house, and you, Celine Marrow, will remain under close observation pending further inquiry." As the council began dispersing, Kale approached Elara hesitantly, his expression a complicated mixture of relief and lingering guilt. "Elara, Not tonight, Kale," she said quietly, cutting him off before he could offer whatever explanation or apology he intended. "Tonight, I simply want to breathe fresh air that does not smell like tower stone." He nodded, stepping back to allow her passage, though something in his expression suggested this conversation was far from finished, merely postponed until she found herself ready to face it fully. Elara walked from the hall into the storm-cooled night air, rain finally beginning to ease as she made her way toward the pack house that had, until recently, been her home. Behind her, she could feel Celine's gaze burning with barely contained fury, and she understood, with the same sharpened certainty that had guided her through tonight's hearing, that this victory, however satisfying, was far from the end of whatever conflict now stretched ahead of her. A knock sounded on Alara's chamber door before sunrise, urgent and insistent enough that she was already awake and alert before she crossed the room to answer it. Edwin stood on the other side, his expression tight with worry, the old book she had returned to him now clutched once again in his trembling hands. "Celine left the pack house sometime in the night," he said without preamble. "The guards assigned to observe her claim she slipped past them entirely. No one knows where she has gone." Ilara's stomach tightened. Freedom, it seemed, had arrived only hours before her greatest threat had chosen to vanish rather than face further scrutiny. "Has Kale been informed?" "He has organized search parties already," Edwin confirmed. "But Elara, there is something else you should know. I found the evidence I have been searching for since Grace's death, buried deep within old pack records I nearly overlooked. Celine is not who she has always claimed to be." He held out a weathered document, its edges frayed with age, and Elara took it carefully, scanning the contents with growing disbelief. Genealogy records, carefully falsified decades earlier, disguising Celine's true lineage from a rival pack territory that Blackthorn had once been in direct conflict with, a lineage that would have made her marriage to any Blackthorn alpha, let alone her current position of influence, entirely forbidden under old pack law. "She has been lying about her identity for years," Elara murmured, piecing together implications rapidly. "If this is true, her entire position within this pack has been built on fraud from the very beginning." "There is more," Edwin said grimly. "The rival territory she truly descends from was destroyed decades ago in a conflict involving moon judges. I believe Celine has always known about the old legends, has perhaps spent years searching for a way to either awaken such power herself or prevent anyone else from doing so, fearing what such power might mean for her carefully constructed position here." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Celine's growing desperation as Alara's confinement continued, her comment overheard by Nora about the tower giving up its secrets, all of it suddenly made far more sense given this new understanding of her true motivations. "She knows about the awakening," Elara said quietly. "She has likely known, or at least suspected, far longer than I realized. Which means her disappearance tonight is unlikely to be simple flight," Edwin said grimly. "I fear she may be moving towards something far more dangerous than mere escape." Elara dressed quickly, her mind racing through possibilities, as she prepared to join whatever search efforts Kale had already organized. She found him in the main hall, coordinating with several senior pack members, his expression tight with barely restrained urgency. "Elara," he said, surprise evident as she approached, "you should rest. You have been through enough these past weeks without adding this to your burdens." I have information that may help locate her, Alara replied, cutting straight to the matter at hand rather than engaging with concerns about her own well-being. She quickly relayed what Edwin had discovered, watching Cale's expression shift from surprise to something closer to horror as the full scope of Celine's deception became clear. All these years, he said quietly, more to himself than to Alara, I trusted her completely, and she was lying to me from the very beginning. There is no time to process that fully right now, Alara said, not unkindly, but with the practical urgency the situation demanded. We need to determine where she might have gone, and quickly, before whatever plan she has set in motion progresses further. Cale nodded, gathering himself with visible effort. The rival territory Edwin mentioned, does it still exist in any form? According to the records, the land itself remains, though the pack that once claimed it was scattered decades ago, Edwin explained. If Celine has maintained any connection to that heritage, it is possible she has fled there, perhaps seeking allies or resources we know nothing about. Then that is where we begin searching, Cale said, already moving toward the door, calling for scouts to prepare for immediate departure. Alara moved to follow, but Cale turned back toward her, his expression hesitant. Alara, you do not need to come. You have already given more than enough tonight. I am coming, she said firmly, leaving no room for argument. Whatever this becomes, I intend to see it through myself, not wait safely behind while others determine my fate yet again. Something in her tone must have convinced him further argument would prove futile, because he simply nodded, gesturing for her to join the assembling search party. They rode out as dawn broke fully over the hills, storm clouds from the previous night finally clearing to reveal pale morning light. Alara found herself acutely aware, as they traveled, of the strange sensitivity still humming beneath her composure, the awareness that had first fully manifested during the council hearing, continuing to sharpen with each passing hour, as though her body was gradually adjusting to abilities it had only recently begun to access. The ruined territory Edwin had described lay several hours' journey from Blackthorn Land, across terrain gradually shifting from familiar rolling hills to something starker, more desolate, remnants of old structures visible occasionally among overgrown vegetation, evidence of a pack that had once thrived here before whatever conflict Edwin's records described had scattered them entirely. They found evidence of recent passage near what remained of an old pack house, tracks in soft earth suggesting someone had traveled through recently, moving with purpose rather than aimless wandering. Cale signaled the search party forward, and they followed the trail deeper into the ruins, tension building steadily as the sun climbed higher overhead. It was Alara who first sensed something wrong, a prickling awareness crawling across her skin as they approached a partially collapsed structure near the territory's center, older and more elaborate than the surrounding ruins, its architecture bearing faint similarities to the moon tower she had so recently escaped. Wait, she said, raising a hand to halt the group's advance. Something is not right here. Cale studied her carefully. What do you sense? Deception, she said slowly, trying to articulate a feeling still unfamiliar even to herself. This feels like a trap. Even as she spoke the words, movement flickered at the structure's entrance, and Celine stepped into view, her expression composed despite the desperate circumstances that had brought her to this ruined place. Behind her, several unfamiliar wolves emerged as well, clearly allies she had gathered from whatever remained of her true heritage's scattered remnants. Cale, Celine said, her voice carrying false warmth that did little to disguise the calculation beneath it. I am relieved you came. I feared what might happen if I faced this alone. Faced what alone? Cale asked carefully, clearly wary, despite years of trust now thoroughly shattered by recent revelations. The truth, Celine said, her gaze flicking briefly toward Alara before returning to Cale. I discovered something dangerous within Blackthorn territory, something I feared would destroy everything we have built together if left unchecked. You mean the tower, Alara said flatly, refusing to let Celine control the narrative any further. Celine's composed expression flickered, something sharper and more desperate showing briefly beneath the surface. You do not understand what you are dealing with, Alara. Powers like the one awakening within you destroyed my family's entire territory generations ago. I have spent my whole life trying to prevent history from repeating itself. By murdering innocent pack members who might have exposed your lies, Ilara challenged, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath her composure. Grace and Owen discovered fragments of the truth about my heritage, Celine admitted, her mask finally slipping entirely. I could not allow that information to spread before I had secured my position fully. Their deaths were regrettable, but necessary. Cale's expression hardened into something Ilara had rarely seen from him, cold fury replacing whatever lingering affection had clouded his judgment for so long. Necessary, he repeated flatly. You murdered 2 of our pack members and call it necessary. I did what I believed protected everyone from a far greater danger, Celine insisted, though her voice carried less conviction now, cracks forming beneath the careful facade she had maintained for so long. Ilara's awakening threatens everything, Cale. If the old power fully manifests, it could unravel pack structures across every territory, could strip alphas of authority they have held for generations, or it could hold accountable those who abuse that authority, Ilara countered. Which is precisely why you fear it so deeply. The wolves gathered behind Celine shifted uneasily, exchanging glances that suggested they had perhaps not fully understood the extent of what they had been recruited to support. Ilara noticed the hesitation and pressed her advantage. Whatever Celine has told you about me, about what I represent, consider carefully whether murdering innocent people to protect one woman's secrets truly aligns with whatever cause you believe you are serving, she said, addressing the unfamiliar wolves directly. Doubt flickered visibly across several faces, and Celine, recognizing her control slipping, took a step backward toward the ruined structure's entrance. This conversation is finished, she said sharply. Cale, either stand with me now, fully and completely, or accept that everything we once shared is truly over. Cale's expression remained hard, unmoved by whatever plea lingered beneath Celine's ultimatum. It has been over for longer than you realize, Celine. I simply refuse to see it clearly until now. Fury and desperation warred visibly across Celine's features before she turned, sprinting toward the structure's entrance, disappearing into its shadowed interior. Cale moved to follow immediately, but Ilara caught his arm, halting his advance. Let me go first, she said quietly. Whatever awaits inside, I suspect it concerns me more directly than anyone else here. He hesitated only a moment before nodding, understanding, settling into his expression, despite the clear reluctance in his posture. Ilara released his arm and moved toward the structure's entrance, her heartbeat steady, despite the uncertainty of what waited within, the strange, sharpened awareness guiding her forward with a confidence she had not possessed when this entire ordeal began weeks earlier. The interior of the ruined structure felt colder than the morning air outside, shadows pooling thick in corners where sunlight failed to reach through gaps in the crumbling roof. Ilara moved carefully through the debris-strewn entryway, her senses stretched taut, listening for any sound that might reveal Celine's location within the maze of collapsed corridors. She found her in a central chamber remarkably similar to the one atop the moon tower, circular in design, open partially to the sky, though this structure's carvings had faded far more severely with time, barely visible beneath decades of neglect and weather damage. Celine stood near the chamber's center, breathing hard from her sprint, her composed mask entirely abandoned now, in favor of raw, visible desperation. This was my family's tower once, Celine said as Ilara entered, her voice carrying a bitter edge. Before the Blackthorn Pack's ancestors destroyed everything we had built, claiming our territory as spoils of a conflict that never should have happened. Is that truly what occurred? Ilara asked carefully, sensing incompleteness in Celine's version of events. Or is there more to this history you have conveniently left out? Celine's jaw tightened. My ancestors held power similar to what you are experiencing now. A moon judge rose among my family, generations ago, and rather than using that power wisely, she grew consumed by it, stripping rank and authority from anyone she deemed unworthy, including her own family members who dared question her judgment. The chaos she caused eventually brought neighboring packs down upon us, determined to end the threat before it spread further. So your fear of this power is rooted in genuine history, Ilara said slowly, understanding shifting somewhat, though not softening entirely, given everything Celine had done to reach this moment. But that does not excuse murdering innocent people to prevent history from repeating. I was trying to protect everyone, Celine insisted, though her voice cracked slightly on the words. You do not understand what unchecked power like this can become, Ilara. I have seen the old records, the accounts of what happened to my family. I could not allow it to happen again. Then perhaps, Ilara said, moving carefully closer, despite Celine's obvious agitation, you should have trusted someone with the truth, rather than choosing violence and deception to control an outcome you feared. Grace and Owen deserved better than becoming casualties of your unresolved family history. Something in Celine's expression crumpled slightly, a flicker of genuine remorse breaking through the desperation, though it vanished quickly beneath renewed defensiveness. It is too late for regret now. What matters is preventing you from becoming what my ancestor became. I have no intention of becoming a tyrant, Ilara said firmly, but you do not get to make that determination for me through murder and manipulation. If you truly feared what this power might become, the honest path would have been open conversation, not secret killings and elaborate lies. Celine's hands trembled slightly at her sides, and Ilara noticed, with growing concern, a faint shimmer beginning to build around her, some latent ability stirring within Celine herself, inherited perhaps from the same bloodline that had produced her family's fallen judge generations earlier. I will not allow this power to destroy another family, Celine said, her voice hardening with sudden resolve. If I must stop you here, in this place where it all began, then I will do what is necessary. Ilara felt the shift in the air before Celine moved, some instinct honed through weeks of quiet meditation, warning her of the coming attack, even before it fully materialized. She sidestepped, as Celine lunged forward, a burst of dark, chaotic energy crackling, where Ilara had stood only moments before, scorching the ancient stone floor with visible force. Celine, stop, Ilara called, backing carefully toward the chamber's edge, still hoping to avoid full confrontation despite the clear danger now evident in Celine's unstable, untrained abilities. This will solve nothing. It will solve everything, Celine snarled, advancing again, chaotic energy building visibly around her clenched fists. Once you are gone, this threat ends permanently. Ilara had no choice but to defend herself, as Celine attacked again, raw and unpredictable power crackling dangerously close. She called upon the sharpened awareness that had guided her recent months, feeling something deeper stir within her chest, her wolf responding with an intensity far beyond anything she had experienced even during her earlier moments of awakening within the tower. Silver light began building around her hands, controlled and steady in stark contrast to the chaotic darkness surrounding Celine's own emerging power. I do not want to hurt you, Ilara said, even as she prepared to defend herself against whatever came next. But I will not simply allow you to end this through violence either. Celine's response came as another desperate lunge, and this time, Ilara met the attack directly, silver light meeting chaotic darkness in a collision that sent both women staggering backward, the ancient chamber shuddering under the force of power neither had fully learned to control. Outside, Kale and the remaining search party had gathered near the structure's entrance, clearly sensing the disturbance building within, though none dared enter given the visible energy now flickering through gaps in the crumbling walls. Kale's expression carried visible anguish, torn between wanting to intervene and understanding that this confrontation ultimately belonged to Ilara alone. Within the chamber, Celine staggered, her chaotic power beginning to falter as exhaustion and desperation took their toll on abilities she had clearly never properly trained or understood. Ilara, by contrast, felt her own control steadying with each passing moment, the meditation and study she had devoted herself to during her confinement, finally bearing fruit when she needed it most. You cannot win this, Ilara said, not unkindly, though firm conviction underlined every word. Your power comes from fear and desperation. Mine comes from something steadier. Celine's chaotic energy flickered weakly, her breathing ragged as exhaustion finally overcame her. I only wanted to protect what I had built, she said, her voice breaking entirely now, all pretense of composure abandoned. Everything I did was to prevent losing everything again, the way my family lost everything generations ago. And in trying to prevent that loss, you became the very thing your family's downfall warned against, Ilara said gently, lowering her own defensive stance now that Celine's power had clearly diminished beyond any real threat. Fear does not justify what you have done, Celine. Grace and Owen still deserve justice, regardless of whatever pain drove you to harm them. Celine sank to her knees amid the chamber's ancient carvings, tears finally breaking through her carefully maintained composure, sobs shaking her shoulders as months, perhaps years, of desperate secrecy finally collapsed entirely. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, all fight drained from her voice. "Now," Elara said, "you face the consequences of your choices, honestly and completely, before the council and before the pack you have deceived for so long." She extended a hand, not in violence, but in something closer to reluctant compassion, understanding that whatever cruelty Celine had inflicted, some genuine, twisted fear had driven her actions from the very beginning. Celine stared at the offered hand for a long moment before finally accepting it, allowing Elara to help her rise from the chamber's floor. Together, they walked from the ruined structure into the bright morning light, where Kale and the search party waited, with expressions ranging from relief to lingering shock at witnessing whatever strange energy had flickered through the ruins moments earlier. "It is over," Elara said simply, meeting Kale's questioning gaze. "Celine will return with us, to face the council and answer fully for what has happened." Kale studied Celine's broken posture, her tear-streaked face, with an expression Elara could not fully read, old affection warring visibly against justified anger and betrayal. He said nothing directly to Celine, simply nodding toward two guards to take custody of her for the journey back toward Blackthorn territory. As the search party organized itself for departure, Kale approached Elara carefully, his expression carrying a complicated mixture of gratitude, guilt, and something else she could not quite name. "You could have simply let her power destroy her out there," he said quietly. "No one would have questioned it, given everything she has done." "That is not who I choose to be," Elara replied simply. "Whatever power I carry, I intend to use it with more wisdom than fear," allowed Celine to manage. Kale studied her for a long moment, something shifting visibly in his expression, perhaps genuine respect forming for the first time since their arranged marriage had begun. "I owe you an apology, Elara, a far more complete one than I have offered so far." "We will speak of that later," Elara said, not unkindly, though clear boundaries remained evident in her tone. "For now, let us return home and ensure justice is properly served for Grace and Owen. Everything else can wait." They rode back toward Blackthorn territory as afternoon light stretched long across the hills, Celine held securely amid the returning search party, her earlier desperate fight entirely drained from her posture now. Elara rode near the front alongside Kale, her thoughts settling gradually as the adrenaline of the morning's confrontation began fading into quiet exhaustion. She had survived confinement, betrayal, and now direct confrontation with a power she barely understood herself. Whatever came next, whatever the council's judgment against Celine ultimately became, Elara understood clearly that she was no longer the same woman who had entered that tower weeks earlier, uncertain and quietly heartbroken. Something stronger, steadier, had emerged from that dark confinement, and she intended to carry that strength forward into whatever future awaited her. The council chamber filled to capacity the following evening, word of Celine's capture spreading rapidly through Blackthorn territory, until nearly every pack member sought a place within the hall to witness whatever judgment awaited her. Elara stood near the front, composed despite the weight of countless eyes upon her, while Celine knelt before the assembled elders, her wrists bound with simple rope, her earlier desperate defiance replaced now with hollow resignation. "Celine Marrow," the eldest council member began, his voice carrying grave authority through the crowded hall, "you stand accused of the murders of Grace and Owen, of years of deception regarding your true heritage, and of attempting to harm Luna Elara through means unauthorized by any pack law. How do you answer these charges?" Celine remained silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the stone floor before her. When she finally spoke, her voice carried none of the confident manipulation Elara remembered from weeks earlier, only tired, hollow honesty. "I do not deny what I have done. I sought to protect what I believed I was building here, and in doing so, I became something far worse than anything I feared." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd, some pack members exchanging surprised glances at such direct admission, others nodding grimly, as though confirmation merely validated suspicions already firmly held. "Do you offer any explanation for your actions?" the elder pressed, "beyond simple confession?" Celine lifted her gaze slightly, though she did not look toward Alara or Kale directly. "My family once held power, similar to what Luna Elara now carries. Generations ago, that power destroyed us entirely, scattered what remained of my bloodline across territories that no longer wanted us. I grew up hearing those stories, taught from childhood that such power inevitably corrupts, inevitably destroys everything it touches. When I discovered what Alara might be becoming, I panicked. I convinced myself that stopping her, by whatever means necessary, was the only way to prevent history from repeating itself." "And Grace? Owen?" another council member asked pointedly. "What threat did they pose to justify their deaths?" "They discovered fragments of my true heritage," Celine admitted, her voice barely above a whisper now. "I feared exposure would end everything I had built, would leave me as vulnerable and scattered as my ancestors once were. I told myself their deaths were necessary sacrifices. I understand now that reasoning was nothing more than cowardice, dressed up as strategy." The hall fell into heavy silence following her admission, the weight of genuine remorse mixing uncomfortably with the undeniable severity of her crimes. Alara watched the council members confer quietly among themselves, understanding that whatever judgment they reached would need to balance justice for the fallen against whatever complicated truth lay beneath Celine's actions. Akale, standing near the platform's edge, finally stepped forward, addressing the council directly. "I request permission to speak, given my own role in allowing this situation to progress as far as it did." The eldest elder nodded, granting permission with a solemn gesture. "I failed as an alpha, and as a partner," Kale began, his voice carrying visible difficulty as he continued. "I allowed old feelings to cloud my judgment, allowed Celine's influence to grow unchecked, because I lacked the courage to confront my own conflicted heart honestly. When accusations arose against Alara, I chose silence rather than defending my wife properly, and that failure nearly cost an innocent woman everything. I bear responsibility for creating an environment where Celine's deceptions could flourish so completely." Murmurs spread through the crowd again, surprise evident at such direct public acknowledgement from their alpha. Alara watched him carefully, noting the genuine difficulty evident in his admission, understanding that, whatever came next in their relationship, this moment of honest accountability mattered regardless of how their future ultimately unfolded. "The council acknowledges your admission," the eldest elder said carefully, "and will consider it separately from Celine's judgment, as appropriate consequences for an alpha's failures fall under different pack protocols than those for direct murder." He turned his attention back to Celine, his expression settling into grave finality. "Given your full confession, and the severity of your crimes against pack members who trusted you, this council finds you guilty of the murders of Grace and Owen, and guilty of deception spanning years within Blackthorn territory." Celine's shoulders sagged further, though she offered no argument, no further attempt at justification. Traditional pack law would demand severe punishment for crimes of this magnitude, the elder continued. However, given Luna Elara's unique position and abilities, this council defers final judgment regarding Celine's fate to her discretion, understanding that the power she now carries includes authority over matters of pack justice that traditional council rulings alone cannot fully address. All eyes turned toward Alara, and she felt the weight of expectation settle heavily across her shoulders. This moment, she understood, would define not only Celine's fate, but the very nature of how Alara intended to wield whatever power the moon tower had awakened within her. She stepped forward slowly, studying Celine's broken posture, remembering the desperate confession offered in the ruined chamber, the twisted fear that had driven such devastating choices. Justice demanded accountability, certainly, but Alara found herself considering, more carefully than perhaps expected, what true justice actually required in circumstances this complicated. "Celine Marrow," Alara said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, "you have caused irreparable harm through choices rooted in fear rather than malice alone. That distinction does not erase the pain you have caused, but it does inform how justice might best be served." She paused, gathering her thoughts carefully before continuing. "Death would end your suffering quickly, and perhaps some among this gathering believe that outcome fitting, given the severity of your crimes. But I do not believe simple ending serves true justice here. Instead, I choose a different path. She raised her hand slightly, feeling the familiar stirring of silver energy building within her, controlled now with far greater precision than during her chaotic confrontation with Celine days earlier. I strip you of your rank, your false position within this pack, and your ability to shift, permanently. You will live the remainder of your days as you truly are, beneath all the deception, without the protection or power that wolf strength provides. Celine's eyes widened with visible fear as Alara's words settled into the hall's charged atmosphere. You would leave me entirely human? I would leave you accountable, Alara replied evenly. Living among the very pack members you harmed, stripped of any advantage that allowed your deceptions to flourish so completely. You will work, under close supervision, to make what amends remain possible, though I understand fully that no amends can truly restore what Grace and Owen's families have lost. The silver energy built steadily around Alara's raised hand, and she focused entirely on Celine, drawing upon everything the old text had taught her during weeks of careful study within the tower. The power settled over Celine like a physical weight, visible tension rippling through the hall as ancient magic, dormant for generations, finally found true purpose once again. Celine gasped as the transformation took hold, her wolf presence, the strength and instinct that had always lingered beneath her human form, fading away entirely, leaving her diminished, vulnerable, entirely human, in a world built around wolf strength and pack hierarchy. When the light finally faded, Celine knelt trembling on the stone floor, tears streaming freely now, though whether from the physical toll of the transformation or the emotional weight of her new, permanently altered existence, Alara could not fully determine. This judgment stands, Alara said, addressing the hushed hall directly. Celine will remain within Blackthorn territory, under careful supervision, contributing whatever service the council deems appropriate to help repair the harm her actions have caused. This is not mercy without consequence. It is consequence without unnecessary cruelty. The council members exchanged glances, clearly processing the full weight of what they had just witnessed, the true extent of power now confirmed to reside within their Luna. The eldest elder finally rose, addressing the crowd with solemn authority. This council accepts Luna Alara's judgment as final and binding. Let it be known throughout Blackthorn territory that true justice has been served, tempered by wisdom, this pack has not witnessed in many generations. As guards moved to escort Celine from the hall, her diminished form seeming smaller and more fragile than the confident, manipulative woman who had once commanded such careful attention, the assembled crowd began murmuring among themselves, awe and uncertainty mixing visibly across countless expressions. Alara remained standing at the hall's center, feeling the exhaustion of the power she had just wielded, settling heavily into her bones. Though beneath that exhaustion, something steadier remained, a quiet confidence that had not existed within her before her confinement began. She had faced betrayal, imprisonment, and direct confrontation with dangerous power, and she had emerged not broken, but transformed into something far stronger than the quietly enduring Luna she had once been. Kale approached slowly as the hall began emptying, his expression carrying visible awe mixed with lingering guilt. I do not fully understand what you have become, he admitted quietly, but I understand clearly now that I nearly lost something far more valuable than I ever properly recognized. Alara studied him carefully, weighing his words against weeks of accumulated hurt and betrayal that could not simply be erased by one moment of honest reflection. We will speak more, Kale, when I have had time to properly rest and process everything that has happened. For tonight, I simply need quiet. He nodded, stepping back respectfully, allowing her space as she made her way from the hall, countless pack members parting silently to let her pass, their expressions carrying newfound respect that had been entirely absent during her earlier confinement. As Alara walked beneath the clear night sky, moonlight bathing the pack grounds in familiar silver light, she felt her wolf settle peacefully within her chest for the first time in weeks, no longer restless or uncertain, but steady and confident in the power now fully awakened and firmly under her control. News of Alara's judgment against Celine spread quickly beyond Blackthorn territory, carried by traveling wolves and curious visitors until whispers of the awakened moon judge reached packs across the wider region within mere days. Alara found herself, in the weeks following the trial, facing an entirely new challenge, one she had not anticipated during her quiet confinement within the tower. Representatives from neighboring territories began arriving at Blackthorn's borders, some seeking audience out of simple curiosity, others carrying genuine grievances they hoped a true moon judge might help resolve, disputes that traditional pack hierarchies had failed to settle fairly for years, sometimes generations. Edwin, whose quiet research had proven so instrumental during the darkest days of Alara's confinement, took on an increasingly important role advising her through these unfamiliar responsibilities, drawing upon decades of study within the pack archives to help her understand historical precedents for the kind of judgments now being requested of her. The old text describes similar circumstances, he explained one afternoon, spreading several ancient documents across the table in Alara's study. When moon judges walked openly among the packs, disputes that might otherwise escalate into open conflict were instead brought before them for fair resolution. It seems history may be repeating itself, though hopefully with better outcomes this time than the conflicts that eventually scattered such judges into legend. Alara studied the documents carefully, her fingers tracing familiar carved symbols, now grown comfortably recognizable after weeks of dedicated study. "I worry about overreaching," she admitted honestly. "This power carries responsibility I am still learning to fully understand. I do not wish to become the very thing Celine feared, someone who wields judgment carelessly, without proper wisdom guiding each decision." "That very concern," Edwin said gently, "suggests you are unlikely to fall into such a trap. Celine's ancestor, according to these records, grew consumed by power because she stopped questioning herself entirely, stopped seeking counsel, stopped considering consequences beyond her own certainty. Your continued caution serves as valuable protection against that same fate." Alara considered his words carefully, finding genuine comfort in the reassurance, though the weight of responsibility remained heavy regardless. She had spent her entire life navigating pack politics as Luna, learning patience and careful consideration in matters of diplomacy and fairness. Perhaps, she realized gradually, those very skills, honed through years of quiet observation before her awakening ever began, now served as the foundation preventing her from repeating history's darker patterns. Her relationship with Kale remained complicated during these weeks, both of them navigating the aftermath of betrayal and reconciliation with careful, deliberate steps rather than any sudden return to easy trust. He had thrown himself fully into pack governance following Celine's judgment, working diligently to repair relationships damaged during his earlier failures, visiting Grace and Owen's grieving families personally to offer whatever support and acknowledgement remained possible, given circumstances that could never be fully undone. Alara appreciated the genuine effort evident in his changed behavior, though she remained cautious about how quickly she allowed old wounds to heal entirely. Trust, she had learned, through painful experience, required consistent action over time, not simply well-intentioned words offered in moments of crisis. One evening, several weeks after Celine's trial, Kale found Alara in the packhouse gardens, tending quietly to herbs she had begun cultivating as a peaceful counterbalance to the heavier responsibilities now filling her days. He approached carefully, respecting the boundaries she had established since her release from confinement. "May I speak with you?" he asked, his tone carrying none of the confident authority typical of his usual pack governance, replaced instead by genuine humility. Alara set aside her gardening tools, studying him carefully before nodding, gesturing toward the small bench nearby where they might sit together for whatever conversation he intended. "I have spent considerable time reflecting on everything that happened," Kale began, settling onto the bench with visible nervousness, unusual for someone typically so composed in his role as alpha. "I understand now, more fully than I did during those difficult weeks, exactly how deeply I failed you. Not simply through my silence during your confinement, but through years of allowing our marriage to remain distant, allowing old feelings for Celine to linger unresolved rather than fully committing to building something genuine with you." Alara listened quietly, appreciating the honesty evident in his words, though she offered no immediate response, allowing him space to continue. "I do not expect forgiveness, simply because I have finally recognized these failures," he continued. "I understand that trust, once broken as severely as I broke it, cannot be rebuilt through words alone. But I wanted you to know that I intend to spend whatever time you allow me demonstrating, through consistent action, that I am capable of becoming the partner you deserved from the very beginning." Ilara considered his words carefully, weighing them against the accumulated weight of everything that had transpired since her forced confinement began. "I appreciate your honesty, Kale," she said finally, "and I have noticed the genuine effort you have shown these past weeks, in how you have handled pack governance, in how you have supported Grace and Owen's families through their grief. That effort matters." "But," he asked, sensing the qualification evident in her measured tone, "but I am no longer the same woman who entered that marriage arrangement believing duty alone would sustain us indefinitely," she said honestly. "I have discovered strength within myself I never knew existed, responsibilities that extend far beyond simple pack politics now. I cannot promise our relationship will return to whatever comfortable distance existed before, nor can I promise it will develop into something deeper either. I can only promise honesty, moving forward, about where I genuinely stand, rather than false reassurance simply to ease your guilt." Kale nodded slowly, accepting her measured honesty with visible respect rather than disappointment. "That honesty is more than I deserve, given everything that happened. I will not push for anything beyond what genuinely develops between us naturally, given time and continued effort on my part." They sat together quietly for a while longer, the garden's peaceful atmosphere offering gentle comfort as the sun began setting behind the distant hills. Ilara found herself, gradually, allowing small moments of genuine connection to develop between them, not through dramatic gestures or sweeping declarations, but through the quiet, consistent presence Kale continued offering in the weeks and months that followed. Meanwhile, her responsibilities as the region's first confirmed moon judge in generations continued expanding steadily. She traveled occasionally to neighboring territories, careful and measured in each judgment she offered, always consulting Edwin's historical knowledge, alongside her own developing instincts, before rendering any final decisions. Word spread of her fairness, her willingness to consider complicated circumstances, rather than simply applying rigid, traditional punishment without proper context. Nora, whose brave testimony had proven so crucial during Ilara's own trial, found herself elevated within Blackthorn's household staff, recognized publicly for the courage she had shown when speaking truth despite genuine personal risk. She and Ilara developed a quiet friendship over subsequent months, bonded by the shared experience of standing firm against powerful deception when it would have been far easier to remain silent. Celine, meanwhile, adjusted slowly to her diminished, entirely human existence within Blackthorn territory, working under careful supervision on tasks that allowed her to contribute meaningfully toward repairing at least some fraction of the harm her actions had caused. She remained distant from both Ilara and Kale, understanding, perhaps better than anyone, the full weight of consequences her choices had ultimately produced. Whether genuine remorse or simple resignation drove her continued cooperation, Ilara chose not to speculate extensively, focusing instead on the ongoing work of fair pack governance, rather than dwelling excessively on Celine's private internal struggles. As months passed, and the immediate crisis of Celine's betrayal faded gradually into settled pack history, Ilara found herself increasingly comfortable within the fuller identity she had discovered during those difficult weeks of confinement. She was no longer simply a discarded Luna, enduring an arranged marriage with quiet patience. She had become something the old legends described as nearly extinct, a moon judge, capable of seeing clearly through deception and rendering fair judgment when traditional structures failed to provide adequate justice on their own. The moon tower itself, once feared and avoided by pack members for generations, gradually transformed under Ilara's careful stewardship into a place of genuine significance rather than dark legend. She restored its crumbling structure slowly, with Edwin's careful guidance regarding historical accuracy, and began using the upper chamber regularly for quiet meditation, continuing to deepen her understanding of abilities that, she suspected, would take years, perhaps decades, to fully master. On quiet evenings, when moonlight spilled gently through the tower's restored roof, Ilara often found herself reflecting on the painful journey that had led her to this unexpected transformation. The betrayal, the confinement, the desperate uncertainty of facing accusations she had not deserved, all of it had ultimately revealed strength within herself she might never have discovered otherwise, locked away safely behind years of quiet, dutiful patience that had defined her earlier existence as Luna. Nearly a year after Celine's trial, a new crisis arrived at Blackthorn Territory's borders, one that would test Ilara's growing confidence in ways her earlier experiences had not fully prepared her for. A neighboring pack, led by an alpha named Victor, arrived requesting urgent audience, their expressions carrying the particular grimness that accompanied genuine desperation rather than simple diplomatic formality. "Our pack faces internal collapse," Victor explained, standing before Ilara and Kale within the main hall. Several senior members of his own pack gathered anxiously behind him. "Our beta hierarchy has fractured entirely following accusations of corruption against several senior members. Traditional council proceedings have failed to reach any resolution both sides consider fair, and violence between factions grows increasingly likely with each passing week." Ilara studied him carefully, sensing genuine desperation beneath his composed exterior. No obvious deception clouding his account, though the complexity of whatever conflict divided his pack would clearly require careful, thorough investigation before any fair judgment could be reached. "You wish for me to intervene directly," she said, not quite a question, understanding already the implicit request behind his formal presentation. "We have heard of your fairness," Victor confirmed, "of your ability to see clearly through deception where traditional methods have failed. I would not make this request lightly, Luna Ilara, but I fear without outside intervention, our pack risks tearing itself apart entirely." Ilara exchanged a glance with Kale, understanding the weight of what Victor requested. Traveling to a neighboring territory to render judgment on internal pack disputes represented a significant expansion of her role beyond anything she had previously undertaken, a responsibility that would establish precedent for how far her authority as Moon Judge might reasonably extend beyond Blackthorn's own borders. "I will need to investigate thoroughly before offering any judgment," she said carefully. "This is not a decision I will make hastily, nor one I will base on your account alone, however genuine your concern appears." "Of course," Victor agreed immediately, visible relief evident in his posture, despite the conditions she had established. "Whatever thorough investigation you require, our pack will cooperate fully." Ilara traveled to Victor's territory 3 days later, accompanied by Edwin and a small contingent of trusted Blackthorn guards, understanding that whatever awaited her would likely prove far more complicated than the relatively straightforward circumstances surrounding Celine's crimes had been. Internal pack politics, she had learned through months of careful judgment work, rarely offered simple, clear-cut truths, instead presenting tangled webs of grievance, misunderstanding, and genuine wrongdoing, intertwined in ways that demanded patient, careful unraveling. The investigation stretched across nearly 2 weeks, Ilara meeting individually with dozens of pack members from both fractured factions, listening carefully to accusations and counter-accusations, using her sharpened awareness to identify genuine deception among the tangled accounts, while also recognizing honest grievances that deserved fair acknowledgement, regardless of which faction ultimately bore greater responsibility for the pack's current turmoil. She discovered gradually that corruption did exist among several senior beta members, financial mismanagement that had disadvantaged lower-ranking pack members for years while enriching those in positions of authority. But she also discovered that accusations had grown exaggerated and distorted as tensions escalated, genuine corruption mixing with fabricated claims until truth and fabrication had become nearly impossible to separate without careful, patient investigation. When she finally rendered judgment before Victor's assembled pack, she chose measured consequences rather than severe punishment, removing corrupt beta members from their positions of financial authority, while allowing them to remain within the pack under closer oversight, addressing genuine grievances through structural reforms rather than punitive measures alone that might have satisfied immediate anger without resolving underlying systemic problems. Justice, she explained to the assembled pack, requires more than simply punishing wrongdoing after the fact. It requires building structures that prevent such wrongdoing from flourishing in the first place. I have identified genuine corruption within your pack's financial management, and those responsible will face appropriate consequences. But I have also identified structural weaknesses that allowed such corruption to develop unchecked for years. Addressing only the individuals involved, without addressing those underlying weaknesses, would simply invite similar problems to resurface eventually. Victor's pack, though initially uncertain about judgment that fell short of the severe punishment some had anticipated, gradually recognized the wisdom in Alara's more comprehensive approach as structural reforms began genuinely improving conditions for lower-ranking pack members in the months that followed her intervention. Word of her success traveled quickly, cementing her growing reputation not simply as a powerful moon judge capable of stripping rank and authority when necessary, but as a genuinely wise arbiter who considered complicated circumstances thoughtfully rather than applying rigid, simplistic solutions to nuanced problems. Returning to Blackthorn territory following the successful resolution, Alara found herself reflecting deeply on how far she had traveled, both literally and personally, since those dark weeks confined within the Moon Tower. She had emerged from betrayal and imprisonment, not simply surviving, but genuinely transformed, discovering capabilities and wisdom she might never have accessed had circumstances not forced her toward that difficult, painful awakening. Kale greeted her return with genuine warmth, the growing trust between them continuing to develop steadily through consistent effort and honest communication, rather than any dramatic, sudden transformation. Their relationship, she recognized increasingly, had become something neither of them had originally anticipated when their arranged marriage first began. A genuine partnership, built gradually through shared adversity and mutual respect, rather than the empty duty that had originally bound them together. The pack speaks of little else besides your success with Victor's territory, Kale told her that evening, settling beside her in the garden where they had taken to sharing quiet conversations regularly over recent months. Your reputation extends well beyond Blackthorn borders now. I worry sometimes about the growing expectations, Alara admitted honestly. Each judgment I render establishes precedent, shapes how neighboring packs understand my role and authority. The responsibility feels heavier with each passing month. You carry it well, Kale said quietly, genuine admiration evident in his tone. Better than I believe anyone, including yourself perhaps, initially expected possible. Alara considered his words, finding comfort in the acknowledgement, despite lingering uncertainty about the vast scope of responsibility now resting upon her. She thought of Celine, still living quietly within Blackthorn territory, gradually rebuilding some semblance of purpose, despite her permanently diminished circumstances. She thought of Grace and Owen, whose deaths had ultimately catalyzed everything that followed, whose memory she carried carefully into every judgment she now rendered, determined that their loss would not become meaningless amid the transformation their deaths had inadvertently helped reveal. The Moon Tower stood restored now at the edge of Blackthorn territory, no longer a place of feared confinement, but a genuine symbol of the balance between power and wisdom that Alara worked continuously to embody. Young pack members occasionally visited during daylight hours, curious about the ancient carvings and old legends now openly discussed, rather than whispered fearfully among frightened children. Alara often found herself returning to that upper chamber during quiet evenings, moonlight spilling through the carefully restored roof, exactly as it had during those first uncertain nights of her original awakening. She no longer felt overwhelmed by the strange sensations that power initially produced within her, instead finding genuine peace in the quiet meditation that continued deepening her understanding and control with each passing season. She thought sometimes of her grandmother's old stories, tales she had once dismissed as simple fantasy, meant to entertain restless children, now revealed as genuine history, carrying far greater significance than she could have ever anticipated during those innocent childhood evenings. She wondered, occasionally, whether her grandmother had somehow sensed the dormant potential within their bloodline, whether those stories had been passed down deliberately, waiting patiently for circumstances to eventually draw forth the awakening they described so vividly. Whatever the truth behind those old family tales, Alara understood clearly now that her own journey had only truly begun with her release from that dark tower confinement. Ahead lay years, perhaps decades, of continued growth, continued responsibility, continued careful balance between the power she now carried and the wisdom required to wield it justly. She faced that future with quiet confidence rather than uncertain trepidation, understanding fully, at last, exactly who she had become through the painful, transformative trials that had once threatened to destroy her entirely. 2 years passed following Alara's first intervention beyond Blackthorn's borders, years that gradually transformed her from an uncertain, newly awakened moon judge into a figure whose fair judgment had become genuinely respected across the entire region. Pacts that once resolved disputes through violence or rigid, unforgiving tradition increasingly sought her counsel first, understanding that whatever judgment she ultimately rendered would balance accountability with genuine wisdom, consequence with careful consideration of complicated circumstances. The Blackthorn Pack itself had transformed significantly during those same years, prospering under governance that combined Kale's steady leadership with Alara's growing influence as both Luna and Moon Judge. The trust between them, rebuilt gradually through consistent effort rather than any single dramatic reconciliation, had deepened into something neither of them had anticipated when their arranged marriage first began under such distant, dutiful circumstances. Celine remained within Blackthorn territory throughout these years, her existence quiet and largely unremarkable compared to the manipulative influence she had once wielded so effectively. She worked steadily within the Pack's herb gardens, a task that suited her natural patience despite the diminished circumstances of her permanently altered life. Alara encountered her occasionally during these years, brief exchanges that carried none of their earlier animosity, simply the careful, distant respect that develops between individuals who have moved past devastating conflict towards something resembling uneasy peace. "I never properly thanked you," Celine said during one such encounter, nearly 3 years after her trial, finding Alara walking near the gardens during a quiet afternoon. "For choosing consequence over destruction, when destruction would have been so much simpler to justify, given everything I had done." Alara studied her carefully, noting the genuine humility that had gradually replaced Celine's earlier desperate manipulation. "I chose what I believed served true justice," she said honestly. "Not simply mercy for its own sake, but genuine accountability that allowed room for whatever growth remained possible." "I do not know if I have grown into anything worthy of that consideration," Celine admitted quietly. "But I have tried, each day, to honor the chance you gave me, rather than wasting it through continued bitterness." "That effort matters," Alara said simply, offering no further elaborate reassurance, understanding that some wounds required years, perhaps decades, of consistent effort before genuine healing became possible, if it ever fully did at all. Edwin, now considerably older but no less dedicated to his historical research, had spent recent years compiling comprehensive records regarding moon judges throughout history, work that would eventually preserve accurate understanding for future generations, rather than allowing such important history to fade back into uncertain legend, as it nearly had before Alara's own awakening revealed its genuine truth. "There are others," he told Alara one evening, spreading recent research findings across her study table with visible excitement despite his advancing age. "Other bloodlines carrying similar dormant potential, scattered across territories I have only recently begun properly investigating. You may not remain the only moon judge much longer, Alara." The prospect intrigued her genuinely, understanding that whatever balance she had worked so carefully to establish across the region might eventually be shared, distributed, among others capable of carrying similar responsibility, rather than concentrated entirely within her own singular judgment. "I would welcome that development," she said honestly. "This responsibility, however meaningful I have found it, was never meant to rest upon a single individual indefinitely. If genuine balance is to be restored across all territories, more judges will eventually prove necessary." Kale, entering the study as this conversation concluded, settled beside her with the easy familiarity that years of rebuilt partnership had gradually established between them. "Edwin's research grows more fascinating with each passing season," he observed, glancing over the spread documents with genuine interest. "He believes other dormant bloodlines exist," Alara explained, "scattered across territories beyond our current awareness. Perhaps in time, I will not remain alone in this responsibility." "Would that trouble you?" Kale asked carefully, Sharing authority you have worked so hard to establish? Alara considered the question seriously before answering. No, she said finally. I never sought this power for personal authority alone. If genuine justice can be better served through shared responsibility, rather than singular judgment, I welcome whatever development leads toward that outcome. Their conversation drifted naturally toward quieter matters, as evening settled fully around Blackthorn territory, the comfortable partnership they had built together over recent years, allowing easy transition between weighty pack governance and simple, genuine companionship. Alara found herself, increasingly, grateful for the unexpected path her life had taken, understanding clearly that the woman she had become bore little resemblance to the quietly enduring Luna who had entered that dark tower confinement years earlier, uncertain and heartbroken. On the third anniversary of her original confinement, Alara returned alone to the Moon Tower's upper chamber, climbing the familiar winding staircase as moonlight began spilling through the carefully restored roof, exactly as it had during those first uncertain nights of awakening so long ago. She settled into the familiar column of silver light, allowing herself a rare moment of quiet reflection amid the countless responsibilities that now filled her days. She thought of Grace and Owen, whose deaths had ultimately catalyzed everything that followed, whose memory she continued honoring through every careful, thoughtful judgment she rendered across the region. She thought of Nora, now serving as one of Blackthorn's most trusted household administrators, her earlier courage still remembered and respected throughout Pack territory. She thought of Edwin, whose patient historical research had proven so instrumental during her darkest days, continuing even now to uncover important truths that would benefit generations far beyond her own lifetime. She thought, finally, of Cale, of the complicated journey their relationship had traveled, from distant, dutiful arrangement, through devastating betrayal, toward genuine partnership built through years of consistent, patient effort. Their story had not followed any simple path toward easy reconciliation, but the strength ultimately forged through that difficult journey felt more genuine, more lasting, than anything easier circumstances might have produced. The carvings around her glowed softly in the familiar moonlight, ancient symbols that had once seemed mysterious and unknowable, now carrying deep, comfortable meaning after years of careful study and practice. She traced her fingers gently across the nearest wall, feeling the familiar grooves beneath her touch, understanding fully now the weight and privilege of the legacy she carried forward. Whatever challenges awaited in the years ahead, whatever new moon judges might eventually emerge across scattered territories to share this ancient responsibility, Alara understood clearly that she had found, through unimaginable difficulty and betrayal, exactly who she was always meant to become. Not simply a discarded Luna locked away by a weak husband's failures, but a genuine force for balanced justice, patient wisdom, and quiet strength that would continue shaping the region for generations to come. She rose finally from her position within the moonlight, making her way back down the familiar winding staircase toward the tower's entrance, where Cale waited patiently outside. Exactly as he had taken to doing during these regular evening reflections, she continued practicing even years after her original confinement had ended. "Ready to return home?" he asked gently, as she emerged into the cool evening air. "Yes," Alara said, meaning the words far more deeply than simple physical return to the pack house that had become genuinely comfortable again after everything they had rebuilt together. "I am ready." They walked together beneath the clear night sky, moonlight bathing the familiar path back toward Blackthorn territory in gentle silver light, the tower behind them standing not as a symbol of dark confinement any longer, but as testament to the remarkable transformation that had emerged from what once seemed like devastating, unforgivable betrayal. Alara had entered that tower as a woman discarded and forgotten. She left it, ultimately, as exactly who she was always meant to be.